everyone. This episode is all about our Knitter Battlefield project. We are hoping to recreate a Civil War battle, the Battle of Naseby, in knitted form and to display it in the museum sometime after we reopen. And I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's already been so enthusiastic, emailing us for patterns and getting involved in knitting fields and soldiers. We've had 2 patterns on our website for a while. The simplest pattern is a pattern for a knitted strip field. This is my sample of the 4 different stitch patterns that are on our website. I'm imagining that your knitted strip might look more like a long rectangle. In order to make sure our fields are nice and sturdy, we're suggesting that these are knitted roughly in Aran weight wool. I didn't have any of that, so I am using 2 strands of double knitting wool held together. And we have some simple stitch patterns. This is just a stocking stitch square. We need lots of these because the battle was actually fought on fallow fields that were being left to recover after a period of cultivation. And we have other stitch patterns that are supposed to look like the ridge and furrow of ploughed fields, the loops of growing crops, and the rows of beans or peas. So do have a look at our patterns and have a go if you fancy. These would make a great starter project for a beginning or practicing knitter, or a really nice relaxing knit in front of the telly for someone who's more experienced. We've also had on there for a while a pattern for a cavalry soldier. He has a little lobster pot helmet, a breastplate and a backplate, which I've knitted in a slightly sparkly grey wool. He has a leather buff coat, leather gloves and boots, and this particular soldier is obviously part of the new model army, the parliamentarian army that had its first outing at the Battle of Naseby. So he's wearing the first ever army uniform in red, but the King's soldiers would have been wearing jackets in all different colours. But what he needs now is a cavalry horse, and we're launching a horse pattern today, which will be on our website. And here he is. And so in this episode, I'm going to show you how to sew the pieces of your knitted horse together to make him look like a warhorse. So grab some tea, grab a project, and I'll see you back here in a minute. Since it is Creativity and Wellbeing Week, I want to start by talking about my yoga mat. Now, I bought my yoga mat in about 1995, so it's only taken me about 25 years to actually get it out the cupboard. But I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to start a yoga practice, and I rolled it out over there, and I've not got on it once. But what I have done with it is this. I have been blocking these little tiny pieces of knitting. You don't have to block the pieces of knitting that you knit for the soldier or the horse, but I must admit that if you do, you do get much flatter pieces, and it's much easier to pick up the stitches on the edges to sew them together. I think it's quite appropriate really that I'm using my yoga mat to block my knitting, because to be honest, knitting is my yoga. It is the thing that I do to relax, to unwind, and to look after my mental health. And I hope this project helps you to do the same. I'm going to show you what happens when you've knitted the body of your horse. Now, my mum has been helping us to design these patterns, and when I had finished my horse and sewn him together, the main body of my horse, I got a piece that looked like that. It looks kind of like a flat dolphin, and I rang her up and said, what on earth is this? Either I have misunderstood, I've done something wrong, or is the pattern wrong? So I wanted to show you that because it's not wrong. This is what it's supposed to look like. It just so happens that when you're making this cavalry horse, it goes through a kind of dead dolphin phase. And when you've stuffed it, it goes through a kind of Loch Ness Monster phase. It looks a bit like that. You stuff the head really well, and you insert a pipe cleaner into the neck, and then you bend the neck into an upright position and the head into that kind of position. And then you should have a nose. Mine looks quite pointy. My mum's is a lot less pointy than mine. It's a bit more sort of blunt at the front there. I don't know why that is. So I've got a kind of pointy part here, and then I've got a kind of mouthpiece here, and the pattern should create this kind of horse's head pattern. It looks like nothing on earth, but I promise you, once you sew on the ears and you put on his bridle and his legs, he does start looking a little bit like a horse. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, I'm going to start by showing you how to sew the leg together. The leg gets very thin in the middle here, and it's really tricky to insert a pipe cleaner and stuffing once you've sewn it together. So what I would suggest you do is take some stuffing, tease it out into a long thin shape, and then I'm going to use 2 pieces of pipe cleaner, or you could use a pipe cleaner bent together, sorry, folded over in the middle, and then I'm going to insert the stuffing into the middle and then just sort of twist the stuffing between those 2 pieces, and that way I should end up with pipe cleaner with a little bit of stuffing wrapped around it, and I can place that then on my leg piece, wrap my leg piece around and stitch my leg piece with its stuffing already inside. And I'll show you how I do that now. Hopefully you've left a nice long end at the end of your knitting, which you can use for sewing together. I'm going to sew this seam together using mattress stitch, which means, now there are probably lots of tutorials for mattress stitch that are a lot better than this. This is what I do. It's just to insert the needle into the middle of the stitch on one side and pull it together, and then go over to the other side. You're kind of picking up that bar in between, in the middle of the stitch. So I'm going to insert it right into the centre of the stitch like that and pull it, and just keep doing that all the way down. You don't need to be super accurate about it because we're not garment sewing. This isn't the sleeve of a cardigan that really needs to be very accurately pulled together. You can afford to miss a few stitches in between. So can you see there, there's a little bar in the middle of the stitch there, and that's what I'm pulling, and then I'm going across to the other side and picking up the bar, and across to the other side and picking up the bar, and I'm just going to go backwards and forwards until I get to the end. And I'm just going to tidy those ends up by bending the pipe cleaner over and stuffing a little bit more stuffing in around those larger sections. So there's our leg. So we've got the hoof part here and the thigh part here. Now just to make a nice flat hoof, we're going to use a little piece of cardboard. I think this is about a sort of 1.5 centimetre diameter, and it's just cut from a piece of cardboard packaging, like a cereal box, something like that, and you just push that into the hoof at the end there. Actually, I'm just going to make that a tiny bit smaller. You may need to adjust the size of yours depending on your knitting gauge and the size of your finished horse. Just cut it down until it's just about the size of that end and push it underneath. A bit fiddly, but it will go in there. And then take a little bit of yarn, thread it onto a tapestry needle, and just do a running stitch around that cast on edge. And then give it a tug, and that will secure your knitting with a nice flat hoof at the end. If you wanted, I'm just going to run my thread up through my knitting so that I can snip it off. If you wanted this to look more hoof-like, you could, if you wanted, cast on in a slightly contrast colour and knit the first 4 rows in a different colour, and that would give you a nice contrast hoof. Do the same up here. Now I prefer to sew these on with a little bit of a flat base. You don't have to do this. You could just stitch this onto your horse's flank without this part, but I find this a lot easier. So push a slightly larger cardboard circle, about a 2 centimetre diameter. I am pushing this on and off. There we go. Now it's in. And do exactly the same thing. That will just hold the top of the horse flat. Same thing, I'm just going to run my thread through my knitting and snip it off. And now you have a finished horse's leg. Now we've made each leg the same pattern, so you don't have different front and back legs. But your horse's front legs will bend like a human leg at the knee, and your horse's back legs bend slightly backwards. So you're going to want 2 bending slightly backwards and 2 bending slightly forwards. And I'll show you now how to attach them to your horse's body. So you can see I've got his 4 legs done now, and because I've put that little bit of card in the end, I can pin his legs on to the part of the horse's body and play around with the position. You can see these back legs bend in slightly towards the centre, and the front legs bend the other way, a bit more like a human leg. So now that I've got them pinned, I can stitch those legs onto the horse's body. Again, just using a tapestry needle threaded with some yarn. Just catch the edge of the horse's body and the horse's leg, and just move around the horse until you've got all 4 legs secured. So here he is. He's got 4 legs, and that little bit of cardboard really helps to keep the shape of the upper leg while you're stitching it on. Now, by some miracle, he is actually standing up, but don't assume that your horse will be able to stand. I think when we come to use these, we will have to rig up some kind of stand for them, because once they've got their soldiers on, they are a bit wobbly. So for instance, if you wanted to display your horse and rider in your own home while you're waiting to be able to deliver them, you could use something like this arrangement. I've got a little bit of plasticine here covered in foil. I've got a knitting needle pushed through there and then pushed through each of my pieces of knitting, and I can display my horse and rider that way. We'll do something like that in the museum, so please don't worry if your horse keeps falling over. So we've stitched our horse's legs on. Watch part 2 to find out how to add his ears, mane, bridle and saddle.